Thank you very much. What a pleasure it is to be here to talk about Austin, Texas, and the Great Experiment. I certainly am honored to be the caretaker of the IC Square Institute, which, some years ago, I guess I got here in 1974. We looked around Austin, Texas, and Austin, Texas was a pretty interesting city. The growth industry was Tex-Mex food. Most of our Ph.D.s were driving buses to Austin, Texas, and out in the hill country to skinny dipping kinds of activities. And so we created an interesting kind of situation and asked one question. How do you move technologies from the lab to the market to create wealth? I really cannot impress upon you how important it is to develop the ecosystem. I like to start with most of my lectures saying the following. You know, since I finished high school in 1965, most of the great companies in America that scale have taken place, been founded in three places: Austin, Texas, Silicon Valley, and 128 in Boston. The question is why? How did Silicon Valley basically create a new model for doing business? How did they create a situation where wealth in itself was generated to kind of pull us out of the 1970s old economy? And the answer was a simple one, but really a complex one. How do you take science and the generation of science and move it from the lab to the market and include the following: wealthy people, government, and of course, the academy. Now I can say right now that in the mid-1970s, we took the concept from the ancient Greeks. We had the concept of a science city. The idea that science and government and business would literally operate to create a process of wealth. The other thing we understood was that we had a governor here, a person who had been governor by the name of Governor Connolly. And he came to us and he said the following: you know, if Texas does not develop major research universities with an emphasis on science, all of the money is going to MIT, Stanford, Northwestern, and nothing in between. So therefore, the idea was to create a competitive nature or an ecosystem so that science can be moved. We had great minds. We had Prigogine, the physicist, who understood the importance of bringing things together as an IC square fellow, and he asked one question. Are enterprises self-organizing, as in the universe? If they're not self-organizing, then we need to develop a concept called co-opetition, where we would bring all the software small companies together. We'd bring on all the developing computer companies together. And then in terms of the theory being professor types, we went to rural sociology and we went to agriculture, because you know agriculture set the stage in America for moving technologies from the laboratories to the market. The idea being that you would develop a series of ag school, Texas A&M, Oklahoma A&M, Wisconsin, and et cetera, so that research could be done to solve the basic problems of the farmer, whether it was soil, whether it was different plants, or whatever the case might be. We took that idea and said, okay, what are they doing in Silicon Valley? What does the ecosystem look like? I mean, how can we begin to think about Texas and creating a Texas region for competitive natures around science and technologies? There was Ben Streetman, who at that time was the Dean of Engineering. There was Bill Cunningham, who was president of the university. There was Glenn West, and of course there was George Kosmeski. And the idea, again, was a simple one, but a complex one. So we could say that the science itself does not necessarily have to move. You have to have a system, an ecosystem, where individuals understand the importance of bringing the science to the business world, and the question was, where could we do that at the university? Well, at that time in Texas, stock options meant cattle. There were some scientists out at Stanford and accountants trying to figure out what stock options were. There were no courses on innovation and entrepreneurship. We had literally lost the importance of the early entrepreneurs. We referred to them as robber barons rather than the entrepreneur spirit. So the IC Square Institute sort of filled the gap and said, we're going to do two things. We're going to study technology transfer using the model of diffusion from agriculture, and we're going to do experiments in technology transfer. And how do we do this? Well, we go to the university and say, well, we want to do an incubator. So, well, we don't do incubators. We want to do a laboratory. Okay, we'll do a laboratory. So the first laboratory, the Austin Technology Incubator, was born. And the question was, what do we do there? Well, the first thing is the movement of funding for technologists, of course, was moving from private labs to what we now call major research universities. And so therefore, it was obvious that the innovation that was taking place in America would take place in universities rather than Bell Lab and et cetera. And it was also very, very obvious that moving stuff from the universities would be very, very complicated. As university professors, we understood the dynamics of the bureaucracy of universities, and we understood its sort of detachment from wealth. So therefore, the Austin Technology Incubator was developed as a laboratory to move technologies, but most of the technologies came from NASA. We created the study of incubation. We created the incubators in Silicon Valley that produced eBay, Google, and Hotmail under Laura Kilcrease's dynamic leadership. But more importantly, we began to think about the movement of science in an experimental way. At the time all of this was happening, we had a kid that dropped out of school who was from Houston. His parents came up and they gave him to the chancellor at that time. And the chancellor gave him to George Kosmeski, and this was Michael Dale. And his parents wanted to know, how could my son drop out of the University of Texas? George Kosmeski, then the director of the IC Square Institute, took Micah, surrounded him with an ecosystem, and as we like to say, the rest is history. So the ecosystem began to kind of emerge and go back and forth. We had another student at the University of Texas who just hated eating any kind of food that had chemicals on it. This was John Mackey. John created Whole Foods. And I knew that Whole Foods was different because the flood of 1981, it just flooded the whole store, and then one day the hippies had the store back, and it was back up and running. So I belovingly call Whole Foods the development in Austin, Texas, the hippie store, and what a great job the hippies have done. So the question then becomes, what is the relationship between the problems that we try to solve and the movement of that technology? Now, as I said earlier, the IC Square Institute, and even now, what's great about it is that it has moved beyond the Institute. Business schools are interested. Engineering is interested. We have great deans that's interested in technology transfer. But it all starts at what we call an unstructured problem. And for us, the unstructured problem would come from the science. And so we take this problem, and we take it through that whole process of technology commercialization. Now, the most important people in the ecosystem, of course, would be the wealthy individuals. I can tell you now, Austin was built on wealth from oil and gas. I can remember people saying, well, you know, professors, we don't understand how you can make money by software or computers. When I dig a hole in the ground, we know right away whether or not we will have a successful enterprise. So the idea then is to think the process through, but you have to have the technologies, and we take them from anywhere and also around the globe. So one of the great things that we like to say is that if you look at what's happening in America, if you look at the research surrounding technology transfer, I want you to listen to a basic statistic. Saxenian, who's a professor at Stanford, has done research on the relationship between innovation, creativity, business enterprise. In Silicon Valley, 60% of the companies were done by newcomers, by immigrants. So we recognize this. Kosmeski and I did a book on immigrant entrepreneurship 15 or 20 years ago. And we realized that if we could bring and create the ecosystems, then people from around the world would come to Austin, Texas, they would come to Silicon Valley, and they would come to other places. And we just finished a major book on technology transfer in the global sense. It was very, very interesting to do, but it assesses technology transfer in places like, of course, Russia. The most fascinating one to me is the Israeli model that utilizes the military for technology transfer. And of course, we look at other countries such as England and America. So basically then, what we like to think about then is, if you look at our track record, we understand two things. We understand that unlike 30 years ago, the economies of cities and the economies of state are dependent upon the science. That is, the idea that as nanotechnology, biotechnology increases, then of course, medicine becomes a science. Of course, everything begins to change, start to change. So therefore, the whole idea then is to continue to concentrate on the movement of science with the following model. And then I'll sit down. How many minutes do I have? 1 minute? 1 minute? Okay, let me see if I can pull a Les Miles here. 1 minute, okay. The process is the integration of science with the ecosystem. Our competitors in Texas, Silicon Valley and Boston, and it's for the best minds in the country. So I think that the model itself has been shown to work, and what we must continue to do is this: to integrate the basic idea that funding for science and scientific development and the universities themselves and the laboratories in universities themselves are the key in the future in terms of job creation, wealth creation, and the continued prosperity of states. So it's not an accident that the state of Texas is very different than other states when it comes to job creation and company creation. It's because people are coming here to start jobs. It's because of our excellent base of science and technology. Thank you very much.